Welcome to the Mango Effect podcast, where every week we talk about the path to living a limitless life and having the freedom to do it your way. No topics are off limits. We get into the practical, the hypothetical, and the downright juicy stuff. I'm Mindy Rosser, your host and lifestyle cheerleader, and I'm here today to talk about what it's like to learn to surf on Oahu as a grown-up.
And before my mom gets into the podcast, I would like to say something. Hello, everyone. My name's Michaela. Hopefully you enjoy my mommy's episode.
Oh, that was so cute. Michaela just had to pop in. She's my 8-year-old, and she hasn't been on the podcast yet. So here she is. All right, so today we're talking about surfing. So I love surfing, but I didn't learn to surf like a little kid. I didn't learn as a grom, which is what we call little kids here on the island. It really was learning to surf in my 30s. And if any of you know much about me, I love lifting weights, but I am not the fastest out of the gate. I'm not the most athletic type. Every single time I've tried a new sport, it's like, you think of the tortoise and the hare? I'm definitely the tortoise. Like, it takes me years to figure things out. For example, learning to squat. So learning to do a proper squat. For those of you in the gym, any power lifters that are listening to this, any CrossFitters, any of you who consider yourself a fitness enthusiast, you know that a proper squat, like depth matters, your positioning, your foot positioning, being able to brace yourself, breathing appropriately, what your posture looks like, are your knees caving in, all of these things it takes to learn to squat. I had the most terrible squat in my early 20s, but I thought I was, awesome. I thought it was amazing. I'm like, well, I've done fitness competitions, so I must have a great squat. And when I met my partner, Jason, it was one of the first things he said. He's like, you call that a squat? And it took me at least 5 years till he actually said something positive about how great my squat was. He's like, wow, you actually have a good squat. I'm like, it took me 5 years to get that out of you. So needless to say, I am not the most athletic. So the funny thing about surfing is that it's very addictive. Once you try it, you either love it or you don't. So today I'm going to take you through a little bit of my journey. It's kind of fun. Like, this will be like a lighthearted episode, but also I think there's so much that we can learn about life and business. And I've learned so much just from becoming an avid surfer, not a great surfer, an avid surfer. And I feel like there's a lot that we can pull from it. So, and you can apply this to whatever sport or activity you want. But I know so many people ask me, they're like, Mindy, can you please do an episode on surfing? They want to ask me all these surf questions, and you've been requesting it. So here I am delivering the surf episode. So for those of you who love to surf, you'll probably laugh at some of the things I say because I'm definitely still in that beginner, like trying to get to advanced beginner intermediate stage. And for those of you who wonder what it would be like, you're on this journey with me. So it'll all be fun and games today. So when we moved to Oahu, if you've listened to the episode, why we chose to live in Hawaii, you might have listened to a little bit of the story here. But we did not move here so we could go surf. Like, neither of us, my partner and I, none of us had surfed. He, I think, had actually gone out surfing once in California as a little kid, and that was it. So neither of us had like an inclination. We didn't think we were coming here to surf. We knew that there were surfers here, but that was not the intention for moving to Hawaii. I had never even stepped on a skateboard. Like, literally, I have never stepped on a skateboard or a snowboard, anything that's like a board shape in my entire life. So that was definitely not in the cards or what I thought would be in the cards for me. So when we got here, we were told, you should really start spending time in the ocean. Like, there's no reason to live in Hawaii if you do not connect with the ocean in some way. Like, you've got to get into some type of water activity. And we started looking things up. We're like, yeah, that actually sounds fun. And we saw this thing called a SUP, S-U-P, or a stand-up paddleboard, for those of you who don't know what the acronym is. Basically, you're standing up, it looks like a giant surfboard, and you got a paddle in your hand, you're balancing on it, and you're kind of paddling. So it's like one paddle in your hand, you're paddling on one side, then the other side. And they said, if you want to get in the water, this is really fun, give it a try. So we went out and we bought some paddle boards. We're like, oh, this is going to be so fun. And they're huge, they were massive. I think we had like an 11-foot paddleboard, and we lived in like this tiny condo. So like even just trying to get in the house and try to find a wall that was long enough where we could actually put the board was a challenge. But we had 2 stand-up paddleboards, and so we started, and it was terrifying. Like at the very beginning, we were on the boards and we couldn't even balance. Like I couldn't even stand up and balance on the board and go straight in flat water. Like there were no waves, nothing. So I have not spent that much time in the ocean before I moved here. I was pretty much landlocked. I guess you could call the Great Lakes in the Midwest. If you call Lake Michigan, those of you that are in the Chicagoland area, you know what I'm talking about. Lake Michigan, if you call that like, okay, you're not technically landlocked, but that's nothing like the ocean. Lake Michigan is like, a lot of places it's really polluted. You don't even want to touch the water unless you're, up at your cabin up north. So anyways, I had not spent much time in the water in general and definitely not in the ocean. So I was pretty terrified. And just seeing like things swimming beneath like the stand-up paddleboard was kind of weird. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a turtle. Oh my gosh, there's a fish. Like there was a lot of learning that had to happen when it came to even just being on anything in the ocean and trying to figure it out. So we started stand-up paddleboarding, and there's this little, if you're familiar with it, some of you have been to Oahu because you've told me, but there's the Haleiwa Bridge. So it's like the Rainbow Bridge. You can Google it and look it up. It's like this bridge, and there's a little river that goes under it that kind of goes empties into the ocean. And so it's a really good calm spot where once you're out of the open water, there are no waves. So it's a good spot just to learn and get comfortable. So we took that step and we would do like 45 minutes a couple times a week. And it was fun, but it got kind of boring, to be honest. Some people I know, if you're like a hardcore stand-up paddleboarder, you're like, Mindy, it's not boring. But for us, it was. So we really were like, okay, is it time? Do you think we could actually do this on a surfboard and like catch waves? And it's funny, we used to watch surfers. So where we would paddleboard, there were a number of breaks. So like some of my favorite breaks, Poena Point, is one of them. And then you also have Alihi, which is where the Haleiwa wave, like if you Google anything online, you'll see Haleiwa and pro surfers surfing it when it's, huge. Most of the time it's not that big. Well, it depends on the season, of course, but Alihi is what it's called if you are surfing it when it's not massive. So you could see surfers there, while we're paddleboarding. I'm like, wow, I don't know how they catch waves. That's incredible. I couldn't even comprehend what it would even feel like to be on a wave that's like pushing you forward. So we decided, you know what, let's just take our first surf lesson and just see how it goes. So I signed us up. I'm like, okay, let's not do it here on the North Shore. Let's definitely go to Waikiki. So on Oahu, you have the North Shore. That's where all the big, scary, epic waves are, in my opinion. You may get different opinions from people who live in what we call town, which is Waikiki. So you have Bulls. Bulls is like the most aggressive wave there. But Waikiki is like a very mellow break. That's where all the tourists are. If you're going to take a surf lesson and you want like sandy bottom beaches, that's the place to go. So we decided to go to Waikiki, take a surf lesson, and both of us, like that first moment when you stand up on a wave, it's like the most amazing feeling ever. You're like, OMG. Like I didn't know there was a feeling or anything like this. It's an incredible feeling. So the first time, you're getting pushed into waves by the surf instructor. He's like, stand up, paddle, turn, put your arms up. They're like yelling cues at you and you're just like, I can't even barely paddle. Like they're yelling so much stuff at you and you're just trying to balance and stay on your board. And you're just terrified because you're like, you're not going that fast, but it feels like you're going fast, especially when you don't know how to control the board. So after that first surf lesson, we came in and we're like, we're hooked. We love it. We're going to go buy surfboards. So we did. We bought some secondhand boards. Husband got them from a guy who knew a guy or something like that. And we got, okay, so if you don't know about surfboards, there are boards that are made for beginners. There are boards that are made for people who ride a log or what you would call long boards. They're very long boards. And they do all that fancy footwork. When you see people hanging 10, hanging 5, that's a long board. And then you also have short boards, which is what you would see a pro surfer, typical pro surfer, where they kind of do these really cool up and down turns along the way of getting barreled and all that good stuff. So you have all these types of boards. So we didn't know what we were looking for. We're like, oh, well, as long as it's a long board, has enough volume, we can paddle it, then we're fine. So we got nose riders, which are like for very advanced longboarders, people that ride longboards and do like fancy footwork, hanging 5, hanging 10. So it was hilarious. So we took it back to Waikiki. We had our boards. The surf instructor saw us and they're just laughing. They're like, this is your second time? paddle. Like, it was so hard just to even paddle on the board and keep your balance. Like, we kept falling off the boards. Like, even though we're like incredibly, like in our minds, we were incredibly fit people. Like, we've, gym rats, always lifting weights. You're like, the surfing thing can't be too hard. It's hard. So just staying on your board and paddling efficiently is a skill to learn. So we didn't catch anything, but we had the stoke. So we started experimenting. We started trying other boards. We went to a surf shop, said, hey, can you help us out? We got this 9.6 Walden Performance longboard. It's fantastic. We still have it. My husband likes to take it out. And it was just really helpful to just start trying boards. So eventually we figured it out and we started surfing some really good beginner breaks. Puana Point's a good one on the North Shore. Don't really like surfing town. That's kind of a joke here. Anybody that lives on the North Shore of Oahu, there's kind of a little saying that we say, friends don't let friends surf town. We are very territorial here. So you kind of surf the breaks that are local. And if you do go to town or do go to the west side, which is super scary, that's where the really local people are. They have good waves over there, but you gotta know your people. You gotta make sure you travel in a group, in a pack if you're gonna go over there, if you are not local. So it's very territorial here, and just learn that that's the way things are and you adapt. So we started trying some, longer boards. I had an 8.0 that I absolutely loved. It was great. It really helped me learn how to surf. And then I got a fun board, so I kind of shrunk the size. So the 8.0, I shrunk to a mid-length, or some people would call it a mini-mall, but it's a 6.4, and it kind of has a shape, like it has a nice pintail, and it has like a rounded nose. So it's a kind of an in-betweener. Like if you are trying to go, shorter with your board, but you want to also have a little bit of fun and still get that longboard feel, it's great. Like it's a board I've ridden the most out of everything that we have in our quiver. And then I'm also just starting to surf a 20, so a twin fin. It has like a fishy looking tail. They're so fun. I'm addicted. I think I probably will have multiple 20s in my quiver at some point. And I've also tried to surf, some traditional thrusters. Haven't had much success yet, but that's because I'm still a beginner. So it's been a journey, and it's been, I think we've been surfing for, this will be like our third season. Yeah, so third season surfing. And there's been so much that we have learned along the way when it comes to surfing. And I feel like surfing has actually helped me to become a better business person in a strange way, right? You think when you picture typical surfers, or at least the stereotypical ones, you think you're like a beach bum. All you do is stare at the waves. You don't really do much else in life. You just are living to surf. And yeah, I get where that comes from, because I have that feeling, especially when it's surf season. Right now on the North Shore, it is summertime as I'm recording this, so there are no waves, which is so sad. And we have to go south if we want waves, or we have to go to the west side, which I'm a little nervous to go to the west side, to catch waves. So hopefully the next few weeks we'll have some waves and the season will start. Usually we get about 2 months where it's just kind of dead and quiet and very flat. So we will get through that. So how does all of this apply to life and business? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about surfing, and I'm going to share like 15 life lessons that I've learned from surfing, and they'll be really fun, and I'll share some personal stories too. So first of all, with surfing, it really is all about the journey. When you start learning to surf, you are never going to look like the pros you see on the magazines. Like, especially if you're learning in your 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, you are just not going to look like what you see on Instagram. It is just not going to happen, and you have to embrace that surfing, if you are getting into it, it's a long journey. It is one of the most difficult sports. You will hear this from a lot of people that have been surfing their whole lives. They're like, yeah, it literally is the most difficult sport. And when you are learning as an older human, as a grown-up, you just don't learn as quickly. And so you have to be ready to be on that journey. And if you get frustrated, it's really easy to get frustrated because you will see all of this stuff happening out in the ocean. You're like, I don't understand anything that's going on out here. When you first start surfing, you go to a break, you don't understand the takeoff zones. You don't understand how to paddle. You don't know where to position yourself, how to catch the wave, how to time the wave. You know, are you going to hit somebody? How to make your board go the right direction? How to even pop up on your board? You know, so it's really about a journey and breaking it down into steps. And every single journey, there are steps. Like you go here first, then here, you know, so it's a progression. And with surfing, you cannot just like learn it all. I feel like it's so different than other stuff I've learned, especially like weight training wasn't that hard. I mean, yes, it's a journey, but squats are pretty simple compared to trying to get a good pop-up on a surfboard, so it's just a lot more challenging and technically difficult. And then you're also, contending with the ocean unless you're at a wave pool. So you have unforeseen circumstances. You never quite know what to expect with the ocean. It can change in an instant. The winds can shift. Like everything can look really predictable and then all of a sudden it's not. And it can be really safe and then super dangerous. So it's really about that journey and kind of rolling with it when it comes to surfing. Next is that your attitude and energy sets the stage. So what do I mean by this? When you are surfing, it is literally a mind game. It is not about how proficient you are. You may be able to surf like, you're like, oh, I'm surfing like a pro surfer one day. You paddle out the next day and you're like, I'm like the kookiest person out here. And for those of you who don't know what kook means, it means like you're, I wouldn't say really bad surfer, but yeah, pretty bad surfer. You don't understand surf etiquette. You're making all kinds of silly beginner mistakes. So kooky is kind of a word that we use. So your attitude and energy is critical when you are surfing. And sometimes if you are just not in the right headspace, either you shouldn't paddle out, especially if you feel a little weird in your gut or you just have like a sense that something is off, you listen to that and you don't paddle out. But, sometimes it's just getting in the water will actually reset your attitude and also help with the energy. And then sometimes you just have one of those sessions where nothing goes right and you just keep getting smashed and you keep paddling back out and you're like, oh, I'm just going to go in, but it's all about your attitude and energy, and you have to be able to dance with the ocean. So the ocean has its own energy and you have your own energy. And so being able to be in rhythm with the ocean is critical. Otherwise you are just not going to have a good time. Like if you are, trying to catch waves and they're not coming or you're in the wrong spot or it's like, why can't, this guy's just catching wave after wave after wave and I'm trying to do the same thing and I just can't make it happen. A lot of times it's about your energy and your attitude, and people can feel it too. Like when you are out in the lineup, you can feel it. And so think about how this applies to business, applies to life. It's how we show up in our business, how we show up in our work, how we show up in our family. It affects everyone else around us. And so we have to be super thoughtful about how we can actually not control our attitude per se, but how can we get ourselves into the right headspace so it's a healthy environment for everyone. The next is about learning the ocean and the conditions. So if you listen to the momentum episode, I did an episode about momentum. I talked a lot about like swell and I nerded out a little bit on the ocean, but it is really important to learn how the ocean works, how wind conditions, the swell, the period size, it's like, okay, measuring the size of the wave, knowing if there are any rips or currents that you need to be aware of. Is there a really tricky spot with a bunch of reef? Are you going to hit the rocks? All of these different things you have to learn. And if you did not grow up around the ocean, it's really challenging because you actually have to study. Like I'm sitting there sometimes watching YouTube videos, watching about the different tides. I'm like, oh, there's this thing called the neap tide, and you got spring tides. Like, oh, I didn't understand. That's what was happening with the tides. That's why they go this high and this low at certain times throughout the month. There are so many things. You're like, wow, there's a lot to learn, and you have to be committed to learning the ocean. And if you are not committed to learning the ocean, you are never going to thrive as a surfer. You cannot just go look at a surf cam and say, oh, that's cool, I'm going to go out, and actually get better and actually progress. And this is very much like our work and really putting attention into our personal development and professional development and being able to pay attention to what's changing. I think for me that can be difficult because I like predictability. A lot of times I'm like, okay, I want to do this thing in my business and I want to see the results. People say it usually takes 3 to 6 months to get this amount of traction and build my email list to this size and do a successful launch. And when that doesn't happen, it's easy to get frustrated. And you're like, okay, I just got to learn the ocean. I just got to learn the business. I just got to learn my people. I got to learn my niche. There's something I'm missing that I have to spend time learning. And that will actually serve us better long term. But we have to go through that learning process. Next would be just paddle out. And this is something that my friends, so we have some surfing friends, and they have taken us to a number of new spots and put up with us as we are still pretty kooky and beginner surfers, but they're awesome and have made us feel much more confident. And one of their things is just pedal out and catch 3 waves. Like, even if the conditions are not great, even if it looks like a treadmill out there where you're like, I'm just going to be paddling the whole time, the current is really strong, it's just a bunch of white water. The whole theory behind it is just paddle out and catch 3 waves and call it a day. You know, if you catch your 3 waves, you're done and you can come in. And so I think that whole attitude of just paddle out is so important, because just the paddling out and just putting yourself into that space, you are committing to surfing that day. And that is huge. And so if you are struggling in business, if you are struggling and you're just kind of paralyzed because you're looking at the waves and you're like, oh my God, those waves are huge. They said it was going to be like 2 to 3 foot. That's like, 3 to 5 foot Hawaiian, which is like double that. So basically that's like 6 to 10 foot, and you're like, I don't think I want to paddle out. So it's one of those things that you just have to learn. Just paddle out. As long as you can keep yourself safe, you know where the channels are, you know the spot well enough, just paddle out. And sometimes you'll paddle out and you'll look at the waves, you're like, there's nothing here. Why am I wasting my time? And you would be surprised how the ocean sometimes is very, very stubborn, and sometimes it delivers you a set. So you'll wait there for 20 minutes and then you'll have the most amazing set come through that is just perfect and beautiful. But if you didn't paddle out, you wouldn't have seen that set, because you would have just looked at the waves and said, it's flat, I'm going to go home. And you wouldn't have taken that time to paddle out and be patient and catch the wave. So whether the waves are big, whether the waves are small, if you are surfing that day, you just paddle out. All right, next would be commitment to the wave. Okay, so this is one of my things. When it comes to wave selection and committing to a wave, I sometimes have trouble committing to the wave. But I expect everybody else in the lineup that's sitting out there with me, like, if you're going to take the wave, take the wave. Like, signal to me that you're taking it. Don't change your mind at the last split second and turn around and take the wave. Or, pretend like you're going to take the wave and then ditch it. And I could have caught that wave if you hadn't have done that. So when you are going to catch a wave, you look at the wave, you signal to everyone around that you're going to take the wave, and you take the wave. Sometimes you're going to wipe out. Sometimes you're going to catch it and it's going to be an amazing ride. Sometimes it's just a sucky wave, but you already committed to it, so whatever, just take the wave. But it's the commitment and signaling that commitment. The surfers that I like to be around the most are those, like, they are very clear in signaling when they are committing to the wave, and they actually take the wave. And sometimes it pans out, sometimes it doesn't, but who cares? You just go catch another one. But it is committing to the wave. And I think that's something I'm trying to develop, and I'm not quite there yet. I feel like my partner, Jason, he's much better. When he commits, like, that thing can be massive. Like, in my eyes, like, look at him like, wow, he's sitting all the way at the peak. He's taking it, but he commits. And sometimes he makes it and sometimes he doesn't. But he comes up, head bobs up, he's okay, he paddles back out. And so that's something I'm really trying to work on with my surfing, is really committing to the wave and not being wishy-washy, like, yeah, I don't know. No, when I'm taking a wave, I'm going to take the wave. And so even just getting into that headspace for this next season, I'm like, all right, working on my commitment to the wave, learn from my partner, Jason, because he's just awesome at, his commitment to the wave and just taking it no matter what. And this applies to our business and to our life, and whatever we are actually saying we are going to do, committing to do it. I think sometimes we're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna grow my business. I'm gonna work on my email list. I'm gonna do da 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 da. We have like this list of things we're gonna do, but we're not actually committed to doing those things. We get sidetracked and then we're like, oh, I guess that didn't really matter, and we kind of move on. So it's like this wishy-washy, like, maybe I'll take it, maybe I won't. Oh yeah, maybe I'll launch, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll create that new offer, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll reach out to that person, maybe I won't. Okay, if you're gonna do it, you do it. You just freaking do it. You put your head down, you paddle, you do it. You commit to whatever initiatives in your business you believe are going to be the best fit for you. And when I think about waves, there are certain waves that I like to catch. Right now, I don't like the biggest waves. A lot of times I don't like the set waves. Often I will sit a little bit wide, and I like to catch the ones that have a nice little shoulder and that are not so aggressive unless I'm feeling really brave that day. So there are certain types of waves I want to catch, and there are certain waves that are good waves. They're actually excellent waves, but I'm not going to catch them and I'm not going to commit to them. So it's really being selective about where you are applying your commitment, because you cannot commit to every single wave. Like, you will fatigue within 10 minutes especially if the waves are coming in. You cannot commit to every wave, so you are selective about the waves you do commit to, and you take those ones. So a lot of ways that we can apply that to our lives and business. All right, number 6, size is relative. So in Hawaii, I kind of mentioned this earlier, we measure waves from the backside. So if you are sitting out in the lineup and a wave comes through, so you're facing the waves, you're watching the waves. You never turn your back to the ocean. You're watching the waves come in, and then the wave goes past you, and then you look at it from the backside. That's how you measure the wave in Hawaii. So you're like looking at it from the backside. So it's about half the size of if you were looking at it from the front. If you're sitting on the beach, you're watching a wave come toward you. That's how most people, except in Hawaii, how they measure the wave. So they will measure it from the front. They're like, okay, from the trough, which is kind of the bottom of the wave, all the way to the top, you're like, okay, that's about 6 to 8 foot. Now, in Hawaiian, like if you're measuring that Hawaiian, that would be 3 to 4 foot. So it's always double, basically, what it looks like from the front. So that's how we measure in Hawaii, and it's a little bit different, and it's taken me some getting used to, because people will be like, oh yeah, it was 2 to 3 foot in Epic, and I'm like, 2 to 3 foot, like, it's, wait, no, we're talking Hawaiian, which means it was nice size, probably head high. So just understanding size, it is relative. And there are certain types of waves that I like to catch. Like, my favorite size, for the most part, depends on the break. If I'm going to Alihi, I like 2 to 3 foot and clean. Sometimes 3 to 4, especially if the conditions are really good. I love that size. It's about head high, shoulder high, and it's enough energy to kind of get you into the wave. Fun rides, and it's not terrifying. Now, Jason, on the other hand, I feel like he likes bigger waves than I do, and he loves the drop. Like, for him, it's all about the drop. Like, I'm not quite there yet. Like, the drop still scares me, so I'm usually looking for, stuff on the smaller end. So size is relative, and what everybody likes is so different. We have friends, and they're like, oh, they like double overhead. Like, that's their favorite size. Then you have other big wave surfers, where they're looking for the biggest, gnarliest waves you can possibly find. So they're heading to Waimea, which is where the big waves on our island are. So it's really interesting, just to see what people like to surf, and everybody's so different. So there is no right or wrong. Like, there's not like a best size. And it's just like our businesses. There is not like a best business, or like, oh, my revenue is the best. Like, everybody is so different in how they approach their careers, how they approach work. It's all relative. So look for the waves, look for the business that you want to have. Maybe you don't care if you have $1 million a year business, and you're like, okay, if I have to hear another one of those stories, I'm just going to puke. You're like, I just want a business that provides me a little bit of income. I have other income sources, so it's really about a passion or a project for me. Some of you do want to grow your businesses massive. You're looking for those big waves, those big business waves. So it's really different, and just realize there's no right or wrong. It's all relative. All right, number 7, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but you will never look like an Instagram surfer. So just accept it. I think this one was a hard one for me, because when you are surfing a wave, you feel, when you are on that wave, from your perspective, you feel like you are riding the most epic wave ever. And you're like, this thing was so sick. And if you actually had somebody on the beach filming you, and they give you that footage, or if you have a drone flying around, filming you and giving you the footage, you look at it, you're like, oh, that wasn't me. You didn't catch my good waves. That's like the running joke. So just accept that you are probably not as much of a badass as you think you are, or as good as you look, and that's okay. I think having a little bit of humility and a little bit of humor about it is so important, because otherwise you're just not going to have fun. For example, we had a drone. We've actually had multiple drones in our household. And for a little while there, I was like, you got to catch all my waves. I really want to get good at surfing. So every time we went surfing, Jason would pull out the drone and catch my waves. I'd look at the footage. I'd try to critique what I did wrong and figure out what to do right. And of course, he never caught the good ones, Very rare for him to catch one of the waves that I was actually proud of, right? And eventually I'm like, you know what? This is not making surfing fun. I'm like, stop droning me. No more footage. I just want to go out there and have a blast. I don't care what I look like. I don't care if I, have a bunch of footage to post to Instagram just to show that I'm living this most amazing Hawaiian life. Ooh, so exciting, right? It's really about just having fun. And the best surfer out there is the one who is having the most fun. And if you can be that person, people love it. You don't have to be the best surfer. Like people that have that good energy, and you can tell they're just playing, they're having fun, they're like little kids in the ocean no matter what age they are. Those are the most fun surfers to be around. They don't have to look like they're going to post this epic footage or hang 10 and post this epic angle, or they're trying to catch the sickest wave and get the best angle on the drone. You know, those people, they take surfing way too seriously. And yes, some of them are doing it for a living. But for the rest of us who are just enjoying this, just accept the fact that you may look kooky sometimes. That's okay. But if you're having fun, that's all that matters. And we do need to be a little bit more playful, I think, with our businesses and our careers. It's something I struggle with a bit. I take it very seriously. And sometimes I get a little too serious, and my kids come in and start making like imitation faces of me. They're like, this is the mommy face at her computer looking at her screen. And it's funny, and it made me laugh. I'm like, last night Michaela comes in and started doing all the mommy imitations of mommy after a call where she collapses on the bed, mommy when she's working on a LinkedIn profile. You know, it was funny. So I think sometimes we just have to laugh at ourselves and just have a really cool, calm, collected attitude and have a sense of humor. All right, number 8, waves last for only a few seconds. That is, unless you have like a nice mellow point break. Like sometimes point breaks can last a bit longer. But for the most part, most waves only last for a few seconds. But you know what? It's like time stands still. For those few seconds, they feel like each second feels like 5, 6 seconds because of it's really hard to describe, but it's like time distortion. When you are out surfing, a lot of times you will be out there a lot longer than you think you are, or sometimes the opposite. If it's really slow, you're like, wow, it's only been 15 minutes. So it's really weird with time in the ocean. Sometimes it's easy to lose track of time. But waves only last for a few seconds. So you're riding the wave, it's awesome, it's epic, and then it's over. You know, and I think it applies to business in a lot of ways because, you know, we'll close a really big deal or have a great success with our business, or we create a new product, or we write a new book, or we do something really cool, and then it's over. And we're like, okay, moving on. I think one thing to do in those moments is to be extra present. And surfing forces you into the present, but sometimes like our businesses and careers, sometimes we aren't feeling that forced into the present. And the more that we can be present and just really enjoy the moments, the good ones, especially the good ones, because most of the time when you're surfing, 90% of it is actually spent paddling around. You're lucky if 10% of it is actually on a wave. Lucky, like really lucky if 10% is on a wave. So when you are actually on the wave, enjoy those moments because they don't come around as often as all the really boring stuff that we do in our businesses and in our lives. All right, number 9, respect the lineup. Okay, so the lineup is very important in surfing. The lineup is basically what's happening in the water, who's in the water. You know, the locals always rule. Like there's locals, silverbacks. There's certain people that you know are the predominant surfers. And when you paddle out to a break, especially if it's a new break, you pay attention, you hang back, you make sure you're not in anyone's way, and you watch to see what's going on. And you respect the lineup of each break. And it's really important to know who the big players are and how to interact with them based on the given day, based on the lineup, based on the type of board they're riding, based on their limitations. You know, if there's a lot of kooky people out there, or maybe there's a bunch of good surfers and you're like, ooh, I'm the kookiest person out here. So just understanding the lineup is so important to surfing and actually catching waves and having a good time. And it took me at least a year to understand what was happening in the lineup. I watched videos. I tried to understand. I looked at diagrams. I'm like, okay, please explain to me this lineup thing. I just don't get it. And it takes time to learn, but once you learn it, you can play the surfing game so much more effectively and figure out where you should sit. So for example, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the way I like to sit, I usually like to sit wide off the peak. So wide on the peak, which just means most of the people sit at the peak. So most people are trying to catch the waves at the peak, especially the longboarders if they're trying to get on it. If you're a shortboarder, you usually have to sit a little bit more inside, depending on the break, of course, and takeoff zone and all of that. But I usually like to sit wide. So I sit a little bit further from the pack than most people, just because I don't like fighting for waves at the peak. I'm not that aggressive yet. So I like wide on the peak. So I just wait for the waves that go a little bit wide and then I take them, and usually they're a fun ride and I don't have to contend with like other surfers paddle battling me for a wave. So that makes me feel more comfortable. Sometimes I'll sit at the peak if it's a small day and I feel confident that day. But for the most part, wide on the peak, or I'll sit at the inside. So there's usually an inside peak, which is, they're shorter waves. They're usually not the best quality waves. The best waves are out the back, set waves. But usually I go for the scrappier ones because to me it's a little bit more fun and usually they're less crowded. So really understanding the lineup helps you understand where to position based on how you feel that day, what you actually want to do, what types of waves you want to ride, what can you do that day, are you injured, are you trying to work around like a pack of kids that's sitting there, a bunch of groms that want to catch that certain spot of the wave, so there's a lot to understand about the lineup. And it applies to business too. I think understanding the lineup, sometimes we paddle out. Like, okay, I'm going to do this business thing. And we just kind of start taking waves and not realizing we're cutting off the locals, we're making people angry, where it's actually a little bit dangerous because we don't really know what we're doing yet. And I have seen people that are brand new to surfing just do that, and they just charge it. They're like, okay, they paddle straight for the peak, and then they try to take a wave, and then they ding their board or hit somebody that's actually on the wave, and it's chaos sometimes. So I think understanding the lineup and where your place is in the lineup right now is good. So understand your space, really pay attention, look for the signs, understand the nuance of your space, because you will get so much farther in business, in work, in life when you pay attention to what's going on around you. All right, number 10, know your limits. This one's a big one when it comes to surfing. A lot of times people do not pay attention to the surf forecast, especially the kooky people. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go surfing in Hawaii. So the waves are massive, right? But they don't really understand this. There's rip currents. There's so many bad things that can go wrong. And they just decide, well, I'm going to go surf. I said I was going to surf at this spot. This is supposed to be a good spot. And they paddle out. But they don't know their limits. And so what ends up happening is they put themselves in danger. They get swept out to sea. Sometimes they're found. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes the lifeguard goes chasing them. Sometimes the lifeguard is lucky enough to catch them before they paddle out. And you can spot a kook from a mile away. So a lot of times the lifeguards are savvy. But when you don't know your limits, you can get into a lot of trouble in the ocean. You can die. I mean, it's that simple. Like, you can have one bad wipeout, you could hit your head on a rock, hit your head on the reef, and nobody will ever find your body. So it's really important that you do know your limits and you don't paddle out into surf that is dangerous, that you don't know how to get out of. You have to have like a baseline of like, okay, if I get sucked out to sea, can I keep myself above water? Can I swim back in? Like, what am I going to do? And understand what your limits are. I will not surf certain breaks if I know that I cannot make it in because I'm not a strong swimmer yet. And so I am very cautious about where I do paddle out. I'm like, okay, I can surf this break because worst case, I could ride in the waves. It's not that far. But there's certain breaks that I just know I couldn't do that, and the wipeouts might be too dangerous. So really knowing your limits when it comes to business, when it comes to work, when it comes to life, having very strong boundaries is so important. And knowing what's too much for you versus where you're just putting yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone. There is a fine line in the ocean when it comes to, okay, this is just out of my comfort zone, or this is life-threatening, dangerous. And I actually did that once. I was determined in my first season of surfing. I decided to paddle out at Lonnie's, which is a really good break, especially when it's a north swell. And it was massive. It was big. The lifeguards were on the megaphone. That's never a good sign. Lifeguards are on the megaphone telling people to paddle straight out. Don't take the rip. The rip is usually a shortcut, and you want to take the rip. They were telling people don't take the rip because you'll get sucked out to sea. They said paddle straight out. So you got to paddle through the whitewater, and you got to know how to duck dive. So I'm like, screw it. I'm doing it. Like, Jason dropped me off. He said he'd be back. I'm like, I'm just going to go do it. And it was not a good choice. I paddled out, and it was the scariest session of my life because I couldn't figure out how to get back in. So I took the rip. I got pulled out, and then the waves, I just was not accustomed to that size of wave, and just like, it was ferocious waves, and I didn't know how to get back in. It was terrifying. I caught one of the biggest waves of my life and actually did not die. But I really was. It was the one time I was in the ocean that I was literally afraid I was going to die. Because I just couldn't figure out how to make it back in. The waves were just really, really, gnarly, and I was afraid I just wouldn't make it up onto the beach. So really understanding your limits and pacing yourself accordingly is important when it comes to surfing. Number 11, learning how to wipe out. So a wipeout when you're surfing means, you usually get tumbled. There's all kinds of funny little terms for them, but basically you fall off your board and you're under the water, usually tumbling. Sometimes you're pushed down. Sometimes the wave smacks you on the back and you feel like you're in like this extreme cobra position. There's all kinds of ways to wipe out. I've wiped out in a lot of ways. Sometimes the board smacks you in the melon, which is not very fun. I've had my fair share of black eyes and bruises and all kinds of wonderful stuff. So learning how to wipe out is important. And you think, why does that matter to surfing? Because it's how you keep yourself safe. If you know how to wipe out effectively, you can actually surf longer and harder, and you can get into bigger surf if that's your goal, or surf really cool breaks because you understand how to wipe out without hurting yourself. So when you wipe out, you kind of, ideally, in a perfect world, you kind of starfish it. So basically your arms kind of go out and you try to make sure you don't hit your board. If you're afraid, you kind of curl up into a ball and protect your face if you're afraid you're going to get hit by a board or reef or rock or anything like that. So there are multiple ways just to learn how to wipe out. And then you have to keep yourself calm because your adrenaline is pumping usually. And when you're underwater, it's very different than when you're just kind of snorkeling or, you're kind of swimming. Like you can control your breath a little better. But when you are wiping out surfing, your adrenaline is pumping. So what tends to feel like, feels like you're under the water for 30 seconds when in reality it was probably 5, maybe 10 seconds for a longer wipeout, unless you're surfing really big waves, of course, in which case you will need to be able to survive a 1-minute hold down under massive waves, which is not my cup of tea. But learning how to wipe out is incredibly beneficial as you are progressing your surfing. And that applies to business too. All of us have breakdowns. You've heard me talk about them on the podcast where we are just inundated and we're tired and it's like, okay, I just wiped out. Like that launch just completely tanked or failed. Or, I went all in for me. I went all in on Facebook ads and I didn't get a return. It's like, it's so frustrating. So you have to learn how to wipe out. You have to learn how to regroup. You have to learn how to wipe out and then get back on your board. Make sure that you're safe. Sometimes you need to paddle straight in if your board was damaged, if you were damaged, if it was a really bad wipeout, or if it's just too dangerous out there. Sometimes that happens too. So just having that awareness, learning how to wipe out and what to do afterwards is really important to recovery as a surfer and also in business because we're all going to wipe out. There's no way to surf and not wipe out. Every pro surfer wipes out multiple times. And sometimes those are the best videos to watch. Like an epic wipeout, you're just like, oh, that had to be terrible. The thrown over the falls in a barrel, like a really aggressive barrel, that's like the most scary looking thing to me. So you got to learn how to wipe out if you want to surf. All right, almost there. Look where you want to go. So when you first learn to surf, oftentimes you are so focused on just popping up, like you're looking at your hands on the board because you're like, okay, where are my hands supposed to be? Where are my feet supposed to be? How do I actually get from lying down to standing up at the right time on the wave? So you are always looking down, like you aren't thinking about where you want to go. And so one of the things I was taught at the very beginning was, look where you want to go. And I'm like, that's easier said than done. Like first I have to figure out how to pop up and make sure I pop up on the board in the right place before I even think about where I want to go. But once you figure it out, like once you can get your pop-up good enough where you can actually look where you want to go, that's when the magic happens. That's when you actually get to look down the wave and see the face instead of looking straight in front of you and just staying in the whitewater. So looking where you want to go is one of the fundamental things about surfing. And it also is one of the fundamental things about business. And sometimes we are just so focused on what we're doing right now or our to-do list for today that we don't look down the wave. We don't look where we want to go and we miss it. Like we miss the epicness of what's in front of us because we are just looking down. Looking down, our head is down, and we just miss, like, oh my gosh, you just wasted that wave. That wave was epic if you would have just gone down the line instead of staying in the whitewater. So look where you want to go. Have that foresight and develop that muscle. And it's a habit. Like it's very difficult at the beginning and then it becomes second nature. You're like, okay, if I'm going left, I'm looking left. If I'm going right, I'm looking right. Of course, you kind of peek over the other side just to make sure nobody else is coming. But still, it's where you want to go on the wave. And then I'm not quite here yet, but once you start learning how to go up and down the wave, and actually do moves on the wave, then it's kind of like looking at different points on the wave and being able to do maneuvers and really create some interesting lines on the wave. So that's where I wanted to go eventually. It's like, okay, instead of just looking down the line, I really want to be able to see that wave face and how it is just basically, it's a creative workspace for you to just draw amazing lines and to express yourself creatively. All right, 13. 13. Here we are. Choose your wave strategically. I talked a little bit about this when we talked about commitment to the wave, but being strategic about the waves. And every day is a little bit different. Like, I notice this about myself. There are certain days where I paddle out and I want the big ones. Like, I'm like, okay, I want to sit. I want to sit at the peak. I'm ready. I'm mentally prepared. I have the right board. My body feels good. I'm going for the set waves. A lot of times, not so much. Like sometimes if it's crowded at the peak, I don't like to sit there because I don't like to be amidst the crowd. Unless it's a bunch of kooks, in which case, it's still a little bit risky because most of them don't know what they're doing and they're going to take off and hit you. So you really have to be strategic about the waves that you take and where you take them. You're also paying attention to the conditions. The tide. Is it low tide? Am I going to run up onto the reef where I normally take off? Maybe I should sit a little bit deeper. So all of these things you have to pay attention to, choosing your wave strategically because you can't catch them all. And it's like business, it's like career, it's like life. You can't do everything. Like, even though you have this bucket list of all these things you want to do, you can't do them all at the same time. So what are you going to do next? What is going to help you move to the next level? Whatever that level is for you. What is going to be the most enjoyable for you? Some days I just want to go out and catch fun waves. I'm like, give me the little soft rollers. I'm not interested in the peak. You guys can all have it. I want the little stuff on the inside, and I want to practice a few takeoff things. Or maybe I want to try a new board, so I'm going to pick easy waves. So think about your waves and choose them strategically. All right, and then last but not least, never stop learning. And this is one of my favorites because that's what I love. One of the things I love most about surfing, there's always something to learn. You can never get to the pinnacle and then, okay, that's it. I've learned everything there is to learn about surfing. I'm done now. I'm just going to coast. Surfing, there's always something else to learn besides what you already know. And you have to be open-minded. You have to listen when people that are more knowledgeable than you are give you advice, you listen. When you learn something about conditions, you listen. When you experiment and try things out, you're paying attention. So there's always this learning aspect. And I try to make a point to watch something surfing related or listen to something surfing related every day, just because it keeps me in that surfer's mindset. I'm a surfer. Whether I'm a great surfer, it doesn't matter. But I am a surfer, and I embrace that as part of my identity. So every day I'm working on my surfing. Even if it's flat. If it's flat outside and I can't even paddle, then I'm going to become more fit. I'm going to work on my paddle fitness. I'm going to work on my rower. I'm going to do something that is going to make me a better surfer. I'm going to watch a tutorial. So the same applies to our businesses and our lives. What areas do you want to improve? You gotta learn. You can't just stop learning. You can't sit there on your butt, start watching Netflix because you've learned all there is to learn. You have to go and approach it with an open mind and never stop learning. And that's one of my favorite things about life in general. I'm like the most curious person ever. And when I start learning something, it's usually I binge learn it. I'll probably do an episode about binge learning. It's one of my favorite styles. Anyhow, never stop learning. And then 15 bonus, I talked about this earlier, but the best surfer is the one having the most fun. If you have fun in your life, in your business, in your work, in your career, with your family, you are the best surfer. It's like, okay, you're the best life liver. You're having the most awesome lifestyle if you are having the most fun. So if your life does not feel fun, if your activity, if your sport does not feel fun, how do you make it fun? Sometimes you have to, go take out a longer board. Sometimes you got to add more volume. Sometimes you got to change your setup. Instead of having a thruster, maybe you need a twin setup. You have to play with things to make it more fun. And it is up to us to measure that level of fun and improve it over time, because that is where we will keep the stoke. And that is something that we talk about as surfers. It's like, I never lost the stoke. Whenever you lose the stoke, what we call it, it's like the passion for surfing, that's not a good sign. And something is off, and you've got to fix that. And so whatever it takes to fix it, so you get your stoke back, you do it. All right, so that's it for today. Wow, I think this is the longest episode I have ever done. So, all right. So when we apply what we learn from surfing to our actual lives as humans, we can learn to go with the rhythm versus trying to go against natural forces to make what we want to happen actually happen. And that's overarching today. Go with the rhythm. Like sometimes you are led in certain directions. Sometimes you're like, why am I here? I'm not quite sure. Go with the rhythm. Don't necessarily try to swim upstream or try to fight the current. You go with the current, and then when it's appropriate, you ride the wave back in. So kind of think about how you approach life and business as more flowing instead of forcing it. For so long, I tried to force everything, and it just doesn't work out so well. And sometimes I catch myself doing that too. I'm like, I'm forcing this. I just need to go with it because I'm in the right path. I'm riding that rip current. And yeah, it's a current. Yeah, it's strong. But it's pulling me out to where I want to go so I can actually take that next wave. So have you ever tried surfing? I'm curious, if you want to tell me your surf stories, I would love to hear. And maybe it's not surfing for you, but maybe it's another sport or activity. What's one lesson that you've learned from your favorite activity, hobby, or passion that you can apply to life or work or business or family or whatever area you are working on? I would love to hear about it. So DM me on Instagram to share your take on surfing or life lessons you've picked up from your favorite activity. I'm also now on TikTok. Just look up @Mango Effect Podcast. Let's encourage and inspire each other this week. So if you like what you hear, please subscribe to the Mango Effect Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And some of you have been so generous in leaving reviews for the show. I appreciate it so much. If you love the show, I'd be delighted if you left a 5-star review and tell me why you like it so I can shape content accordingly. This will definitely help us as we grow. All right, that's it for today. I will talk with you in the next episode. Have a good rest of your day.